Better put the word out. Get ready for the nerd out. Better put specs on. Better break necks on. I cut handsome checks for my expansion sets. They call me.
What's going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and it is time again for another creator interview. And today I have joining me is Victor Dandridge, the hardest working man in comics. And I'm so happy that you are on this show. So thank you so much for jumping in.
My absolute pleasure. We kind of put this together last minute, and that makes it even more fun for me because it's like, well, then yeah, let's just talk. Let's just do it.
Yeah, usually it's like they're like, you know, I've had a couple creators. It's like we pace it out like a week. I've been working on one for like the last like 3 weeks. Like, hey, can we nail down time? I think I reached out to you like 2 days ago. You're like, you want to do it this week?
You want to do it on Friday? Let's do it. Let's just do it. Let's just get it done. Yeah, I'm all for that.
So I said in your tagline that you're the hardest working man in comics, and I'll tell you what. As I do, you know, I'd always try to do a little prep. I know you from some of the stuff that we've read, you know, that we've talked about of your comics, YouTube review show that you do. And you were just, correct me if I'm wrong, I swear I saw that you were just on a panel with Wizard World today.
Yeah, you definitely did.
I know you've hosted panels for like Galaxy Cons and stuff like that. You're just all over. And then in a completely spur of things, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, and you were hopping on Hot Takes with Billy Business.
Yes.
A couple of times. And I was like, wait a second. I know that voice. I was like, that's Victor.
Yes. When you take on that moniker of hardest working man in comics, there's a bit of it that's a little pat on the baddie, but at the same time, you got to live up to it. And, ironically, Wizard World actually has a lot of connective, pieces. That's where I met Billy. And, we've been great friends. He's a new dad. So it's like all kinds of fun stuff that we have, just brings us together. A lot of geekery.
Yeah.
And, I just did a panel this morning or this afternoon. I was just on Good, Bad, and Nerdy with my buddy Mike Watson, like maybe 2 hours ago. And then now we're here. So, yeah.
Now we're here.
That's right.
When I first found you, I am a local comic nerd here in Columbus. So
yes.
I stumbled upon a YouTube show that you do with Ryan, who owns Comic Town here in Columbus. It's a comic shop, and you guys do a weekly review show. It's called Black, White, and Red All Over. It's on the Comic Town. I'll put a link in this video. How did you get into just starting to do that? I mean, like, hey, let's read comics and review.
It's funny. It was a show idea that Ryan had, or at least he presented it to me. So it was like, hey, I want to do this thing and I want you to be a part of it. I first met Ryan when I was like 16, buying books. He was at the shop, and because of the way I grew up, like I'm from the south side of the city, but my dad lives on the north side. So if I'm up at his house, it was one of the closer comic shops, particularly after British Paper Mill North closed. I was in Tamarack Circle. So would go to, Comic Town. And that's where I first met Ryan. And he's just kind of seen me grow up. And as I started doing comic books full time, he was there, very supportive. They were some of the first, shops to carry my stuff. And, he graciously was like, hey, would you like to do this? And I'm like, sure, and it's funny, like if you go back and look at the very first episodes, like we're so nervous and we don't know what we're doing. It's so terrible. And I think we started in like 2014. So like literally been doing this for like 6 years. Yeah. And it's been a glorious experience. We have a lot of fun off rip, getting to read comics all the time. But I think the best like moment of my Black, White, Red All Over career, I was at New York Comic Con a couple years ago, and I'm standing in line for a panel. I can't remember what panel it was, but I'm waiting to get in, and there's this guy, and he's like staring at me, and I'm looking at him like, why is he looking at me like this? Like what's up? And so he goes, you're you, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, you're on Black, White, and Red All Over. And I'm like, yeah, I am. He's like, oh my God, I watch your show. And like, he like asked me to come out of line and take pictures with him. It was the most incredible experience.
Awesome.
I've ever had. But it was definitely like a moment where I was like, why is he staring at me? Like,
what's going on?
Are we about to fight right now? Like, what's going on? I don't get this. But it was amazing. And one of those ways that you just see that people can connect when you are, you know, honest and talking about the things that you love, or sometimes the things you don't like.
Right.
It brings people together.
Well, and that's what I brought this up, because this is how I first kind of discovered you, and you know, and I got into your comics after watching the show. And it's what is so great for me is you guys do an honest review of what you're reading. Like, you like it, you tell us. Like, you can tell, like, you can tell when there's something that you guys really liked or wanted to like, and you're like, it just did not hit like I wanted. Oh my God. Like, you can see the pain in your face of like, this is gonna be so good, and then you're like, oh, it hurt.
It wasn't though. It wasn't. Like, why? What did we do? Like, yeah, but that's because we like comics.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of comic reviewers that their claim to fame is dogging comics, and it's like, why do you even do this then?
Yeah, I think and that's what's well, and I think it's, you guys are picking out books, and I'm gonna ask you kind of how you go about real quick picking your book. But you guys definitely, you review Marvels, you review DC, but you guys also talk about books that I never hear about, and that's one of the things I like. I mean, you guys did a review on, it was an honorable mention, I think 2 episodes ago. It was called Osiris Path or Osiris Path. And it was by a new comic company, Behemoth. Never heard of them. Read it because you guys recommended it. I fell in love with it. Reached out to the creator, and he's going to be on the show with me here next week. So
that's awesome.
Like, and I literally never would have read it if I didn't watch your guys' show and know about that comic.
That is the way this works. And what makes it really cool is when we reviewed it, I want to say the writer lives in California, but he grew up here.
Yeah, and that's who. Yeah.
Didn't even know, like, that was, you know, we had no idea. We just saw. So the way that it comes about is we'll have all the books laid out that are going to go on the new release wall, and we just kind of walk through and see which ones we want to read. If there's a series that we've been, you know, enjoying, we try to, you know, stay on track with that. But a lot of times there's this internal push. Years and years ago, we had a viewer actually ask us to be more judicious about picking non-Marvel and DC titles. And I think it mattered to us. You know, it was one of those things where, like, yes, Marvel and DC are popular, but can we find things like hidden gems that we can put people onto? And that's kind of always been in the back of our head ever since. So every now and again, we'll just pick up something and just be like, let's try it. You know, Boom Studios, like, our producer, funny enough, like, he was ardently against, Jeremy was ardently against the Power Rangers Ninja Turtles crossover. He was like, that's stupid, I'm not going to read it. And I'm reading it, I'm like, bro, you really need to read this. And he's like, come on, it's just a cash grab, obviously. And I'm like, no, you need to read it, it's amazing. He's bought every issue because
that's
tried it.
That's the truth. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are like, and I think I stole your saying of, it's like eating a bowl of sugary cereal on a Saturday morning.
Yes,
like,
yes, because that's what it is. It's absolutely the truth. It's got big, thick, fun marshmallows, and you're just chomping away, and you're so happy. Those are the things. Like, you know, we can trust that Marvel and DC are going to put out good books. For the most part, they do. But those are. It's not hard for them to do that. You know. I almost say it's harder for them to come up with things that wow us now, you know. Shout out to Donnie Cates and his runs on almost everything. He always finds a way to put in something. We're like, I never even thought, what? How did you? Okay, and then you're just there. But yeah, man, we want to give people some love. You know, Aftershock is a big company that we have definitely fallen in love with. Vault is another big one. Boom, IDW. Like, there's all these different people that are producing great books, and we want people to give them a try. Yeah,
and so, like I said, I wanted to start off the show because that's how I found about your stuff. And I guess I'll put a link, if you guys are watching this, in the video below. Check out their YouTube channel, because it is something that, like, I have found some hidden gems in there that people will see my books and they're like, where did you hear about that? I'm like, y'all, like because you do, like you said, you talk about Donny Cates and, you know, I think Dark Knight, you know, death metal, like, so you hit the ones that hit still, but you guys definitely, you try to dig deep too, to say, like, what's something that someone might not know. So so that's how I first got exposed to you. And then as I kind of was looking into stuff, I found out that you create comics. and we're going to talk about a couple of your comics here. So I guess real quick, I know you briefly talked about, you know, starting to go into the shop at 16. How did you kind of fall into this realm of comic creating?
Oh my God.
It's a loaded question.
yeah. Like it's a big one, but it's an important story for me to tell. Because obviously, you know, as a young Black man growing up in the 90s, being part of geek culture was not a popular thing at all. You know, it's not like it is today, where, you know, blurreddom is even like a fashionable term. Like, it was ridiculous for me to want to be a comic book fan or geek in any capacity. The truth of the matter, though, is I didn't like to read as a child. Like, books were boring. Like, there was nothing about them that really hooked me, aside from Goosebumps. All due respect to R.L. Stine, I love you.
Great.
But you know, beyond that, there wasn't anything that regularly captured my attention. And all that changed when they announced that Superman was going to die. And I'm like, how? Like, how do you kill Superman? I want to read that. Like, put that in front of me. I will read it. And my mom, love her to death, she heard it, recognized that it was interest, came home the next day with a stack of comics. None of them were Death of Superman because it wasn't out yet, but stack of comics, boom, and I've been hooked ever since. And one of the greatest gifts that I got from this was it actually brought my father's side of the family and I together, where, you know, I was a really skinny kid. Don't let the shoulders and muscles fool you. This came later. I was a super skinny kid. I wasn't playing sports, and they were a very sports, you know, oriented family. And if we didn't have anything to talk about, you know, it was a mismatch, you know. But I started talking about comic book stuff, and they go back to the 60s and 70s and, you know, Jack Kirby greatness, you know, all these things. And they're like, oh, you like comics? Wait, well, let's talk. And then I find out 3 of my uncles could draw that I didn't even know. And we start, you know, creating characters, and we're riffing, and it's all this crazy good stuff. And the youngest of my uncles, my Uncle Mark, really took a shine to me wanting to do this, like to get creative and be creative. And he's like, you know, you can do this. You can do this. And like, even helped me do like an art project for church. And this is where it takes the turn. You know, every story's got a dark side. So like almost a year after I started reading books, he was violently killed. He was attacked, and it's a whole, like, I mean, there's a whole spirituality aspect of it that would blow your mind when you hear all the different parts and pieces. But basically, in honor of him, I was like, I need to do this. Like, I'm going to make something of myself in the comic book industry because my uncle so thought that I could and should do this. And so it's really kind of been this like responsibility thing that's just, you know, hand to the back, pushing me forward. And it's like, you're going to do something, you know. And, you know, for a long time I was on the peripheral. You know, I was creating stuff. I was writing for Free Comics. Shout out to Mike Watson. But there came a certain point where I was like, no, I need to do more. I want to do more. I need to do more. This is how it's going down. And I took the plunge to start doing comics full time. And literally in October, I think it's October 8th, I'll be celebrating 10 years of Vantage Inhouse Prodcutions being my full-time job. So it's been glorious, absolutely glorious.
That's awesome. So,
thank you.
So I mean, yeah, that's like you said, that's a loaded question when you ask,
it's huge. It's so big.
So you said your production company that that you create comics with. So let's talk then a little bit about some of the comics that you created. So the first thing, and I got a couple of them up here. The first one that I fell in love with that got me hooked was The Trouble with Love. Wow,
that was the first one?
That was the first one I read.
Ooh, okay.
It was the first one that I got hooked with.
Okay.
Because I think what it was I started following you because of the show. You did an Indigo or something, I think, promote last year or something, promoting one of them, and I think you were promoting the new Never Too Late and kind of bundling it, and so
wow,
yeah. So that was my first.
You know what's funny is once I started Vantage Inhouse, The Trouble with Love was actually the first story that I wrote, but it wasn't the first story released. Okay. So it's really got its root as like literally the beginning of what Vantage Inhouse was aiming to be, which was to tell complicated stories that you couldn't tell in a big house like Marvel or DC. You know, you couldn't take Superman and tell that story. DC would never allow it. it's too damaging to the character by being examining of who he is as a true person. Right. And the fact that it actually has like a very personal, stake to it, also is part of the thing that's most important to me. It was a love letter to my sons. My son's mother and I, we split up, and it wasn't for the best of reasons that, things kind of happened, but I needed to be able to explain to my sons what happened from my perspective. And the best thing ever was a couple years ago. My oldest son was like, "Dad, what happened?" And I just slid him the book, and he's like, "Oh my God, like this book has been around forever." And I was like, "Yeah, I wrote it because I knew you would have questions. And when you're done reading it, let's talk, because here's the thing. I'm your parent. I'm not perfect. And, there's so many things that I know you've heard some stories. There's some things I've never told you. There's some things I'm never going to tell you. But here is something that will give you a quick flash of where I was mentally, emotionally, all these things, and what I was trying to do." And man, you talk about help all relationships involved. Like, it helped with his stepmother, it helped with his and mine, his sister, like so many different things. It just helped. And it came from me wanting to, answer for my own actions and put that on the page. It was super cathartic to write it. It was amazing.
Oh, I mean, and I get that, because as I was reading that story, I was like, wow, this is powerful. Like, because you're right, it's a storyline that you wouldn't expect at a DC or a Marvel. No. It's no. And I think when I picked it up, I was like, oh, this is gonna be a new take on a superhero story, and really not a lot of action.
Yeah, no. It's not a fights and tights sort of story. No. It's really not. Yeah.
But it does just look at the the emotional toll that someone goes through, and like and it's just put into a superhero storyline. Yes. Like the superhero aspect is the costume of a more deeper story, which as I'm reading it, I'm like, wow, where did he, get this idea to write this story? And then I looked at the back page, and
there's that note.
You told him, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Which then I think it made it more powerful for me, because you as a reader are getting a glimpse into who you are as a writer and as a person, and what you're going through. And I don't think we get those glimpses into the creators and stuff that we love to read as much as, because you lay it all out there.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as a creative, a lot of times when you have certain, art fields, the idea is that we're supposed to hide who we actually are. We're supposed to project something. And that's never been me. I'm not that guy. I'm far more of an open book. I want to be someone that you can go to, you can ask questions of, why did you feel this way? Why did you say this? And that was important to me, because it was so very revealing. I wanted people to know, not only did I write this story, I lived this story. And it's funny enough. So Billy Business, when he first read it, he thought that I was the son. And when he got to the note, had to go back and reread it. And he called me and was like, dude, I felt all these emotions, and this is this and this is that. He's like, this is insane. And he's like, how did you do this? How did you put this on the page? Because he's, as a writer, he was looking at it, talking about the page count. It's only 27 pages long in terms of story. So he's like, how did you nab character in only 27 pages? He's like, there's no fat there. You're there. You tell it all. I was very fortunate. The story kind of told itself.
Yeah, I mean, it jumps right in. I think you're like, okay, where's this going? Page 1, 2, 3, you get, that iconic page with that line. And you can tell you were captivated, you're pulled in right away with that. And I think that is what is a beautiful thing about a storyteller. And what was so cool aspect is I think you're seeing stories that aren't told, because I went in with a mindset, I'm like, oh, I'm sure this is what it's going to be. And
right.
And then I'm like, I did not expect this.
I didn't see this coming at all. This is amazing. Yeah.
And so then the next one I jumped into was a sequel, Never Too Late, that you guys that you put out. And so let's just, I guess, because then there's a whole bunch of Samaritan and Wonder, everything behind me here. where did you go? If that was your first, Trouble with Love was kind of your
Mhm.
first story, but not your first, what was your vision for your comics that you were creating and going then with that?
Oh my God, this is such an important question. You have no idea. Like, I swear you must be living in my head to even ask this thing. So the whole point of Vantage In-House was literally for me to just scratch creative itches. I just wanted to tell stories, part of my frustration, we'll call it, with freestyle when I was working with Mike was that we weren't coming out with books as frequently as I wanted to. And I just wanted to tell stories. And so every story that I had planned to launch was all supposed to be separate, standalone stories. They weren't supposed to interconnect at all. They were just things I wanted to tell. And I was using Vantage Inhouse Productions. And part of the reason why it's called Productions is so that I didn't have anything that I was limited in terms of what I could make. I could do anything. It could be comic books, it could be prose, it could be whatever. So I wrote The Trouble with Love, contacted Harold Edge to do the artwork. He was working on a series called Diner Girl at the time, so it was kind of fitting it in when he could. And it didn't come out till 2012. In the meantime, I started to work on the Samaritan series, and Ren McKenzie, one of my best good friends, tapped him to do the artwork for it. And originally, I was going to draw the Samaritan. I can draw. I hate drawing. I don't like doing it at all. I much prefer to write. And when I initially had planned it, it was going to be just a 2-page chapter. Like every story piece was only going to be like 2 pages long. Because again, I'm trying to be a succinct storyteller and do stuff like that. So in March of 2011, we launched the first issue of the Samaritan, and that one was fun because it's only 8 pages long. The first or each chapter is only 8 pages long. It's 7 chapters total, and this is my favorite story. So when we did it, we used a 9-panel grid, and you have to read it in a certain order because the panels kind of form bigger images. Literally, that is inspired by Frank Miller's work on 300. And this is gonna blow your mind. If you've never heard this story, it's so true. So 300 by design has a landscape format, and it's big enough that you can only look at 1 page at a time. You physically can't look at 2 pages at once and read it really quickly. Part of the reason for that is Frank had, I say this like I know him. Frank had issues with how fast. Yeah, it's Frank. He gets. He had issues with how fast people read comics. You would labor over it for months on end, and you would just read it like that, and he hated it. So when he did 300, he did it in this big landscape format, so you could only read a page at a time, and he was actively controlling how fast you could read it, and it has an effect. I read this beautiful, amazing book. It's called Artists on Comic Art, or Comic Book Art, I think it's what it's called, by Mark Salisbury. And he talks about it in that. And I'm like, wow, like being in control of the reader is more than just telling the story and picking what events happen, but really kind of controlling how they consume it. So I got this bright idea of breaking up the 9-panel grid so that, certain panels would work together to form a bigger image, and it would naturally slow you down. So you can't just breeze through it. You got to take your time.
Yeah. Well, it's true, because I earlier in the week I reached out to you and I was like, hey, I love your series. What are some other? And this Samaritan was one that you did, and I was looking through, and it was one I would read a page and I'd go back because I'm like, wait, I missed that it was going to be an overarching picture. Yeah, and it was a really cool concept like that captivated like the reading like that. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, because it plays into one of the greatest stories of all time, and Red hates my guts every time I tell it. So I told him that this was the reason why we did this, was to slow the reader down and make them think that the book was longer. And he's like, that's stupid. No one is ever going to do this. And surely enough, the first show that we ever premiered it at was at C2E2 in 2011. And a guy, my buddy Lee, because we're still friends to this day, he came through. This is where we met. He bought it, comes through the next day, buys another copy, and is like, I need one that I'm going to share with people because this book is amazing. And I'm like, oh, awesome, dude, thank you. And like, I'm signing it, Ren is signing it, and he starts going in, and he's like, dude, I love how on page 12 you touched on domestic violence. And I like kind of stop and I look and I'm like, what did you say? And he's like, page 12, man. Like, you know, when you got to the domestic violence part, man, he's like, that was so powerful. And I was like, there's not 12 pages here. And he's like, what? And I was like, you mean page 4? And he's like, no, it's the middle of the book. And I was like, this is only an 8-page book. And the look on his face was like, you're kidding me. No. And he literally opens up the book and counts it like we didn't make it. It was the funniest thing in the world. And he's like, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh my God, this is only an 8-page book. And I just look at Ren and he's like, shut up. Don't say nothing. And I'm just like, I told you. It's by structure, understanding craft. You understand these things that when you break things up, it makes the book feel longer. And Lee could not believe that was only 4 pages in. He was like, that is insane. I just knew I had a full 24-page book in my hands, and it's not. And I'm like, no, not at all.
That's crazy because,
thank you.
You know, my first exposure was with the trade. So
so you could just plow into it.
I could, and I could really dig into it. So there is a benefit sometimes of being able to read, especially a story I think like that is written in that way.
Yes.
To be able to just sit down and trade and read it all in all its goodness.
Absolutely. Although, okay, so I have to admit, there's one thing that I didn't do that I should have for the trade paperback, and it's to mark that in issue 5 has 2-page spread ones. So you actually have to read it all the way across. And that's not noted. You could miss that the first time that you see it. The second time, I think you probably pick it up, but the first time you could miss it. So that's the one thing that I'm like, man, I really should have put that in there. Like, this is a 2-page spread. Read all the way across.
Yeah, because if you're reading it the other format, you're like, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But once you pick it up, you're like, oh, he did it. That's 2-page spread. And I literally did that because Ren said that it was becoming easy for him to break things down the way that they were. And I was like, oh, it's easy, is it? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, 2-page spread then. And he's like, what is this? And I'm like, no, you said it was easy. I don't want to hear it. Like, you got this. He was so mad at me.
That's awesome. And another one that I picked up, and honestly I've not gotten a chance to read it, and I'm super excited. It seems like it is a completely different realm to a degree than what the first 3, because we touched on it with Trouble with Love, deeper storyline, the guy reading Samaritan, talking about page 12, which is or talking about domestic violence. Like there are deep storylines in here that I think which I think are important stories to be told, that because I think people, that are going through any situations that are even close like that, they're like, this speaks to me, so I think those are important. And then this so tell me, give me your pitch of like what this is about, for someone who hasn't gotten to read it yet, because
yeah, this is too funny. So Kindergartens is Muppet Babies meets the Justice League. And that, literally old school Muppet Babies will sum it up. It's little kids that have superpowers that go to a specialized school and end up having misadventures as they're learning to be the heroes of tomorrow. What made that one such a phenomenal series to work on, first off, I got to shout out Justin Castaneda. He's a phenomenal collaborator. He brought them to life in a way that is magic, like pure, simple magic. I can't even, it's beautiful. Where it came from, I had this idea of little kid superheroes for a while. And in 2012, my mentor, my idol, Mark Miller, announces on Comic Book Resources that he's got this book coming called Kindergarten Heroes. And I'm like, oh my God, he's going to do it before I do. Suck. I got to try to figure this out. So I think in late 2012, maybe early part of 2013, I start, talking to Justin, and he's like, yeah, this sounds awesome. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm working on other things, so I don't start like writing it right away. We start doing like character designs. And at the time, Scotty Young's, Marvel Babies becomes really popular. And of course, that's the imagery that I have in my head. But Justin's like, we need to stay away from that because we don't want to just ape what he's doing. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do? And he comes up with this notion of shape-based characters because he's got a background in animation. And he's like, this will, give all the characters personality and it'll be amazing. And I'm like, okay, well, let's go with it. And he does these designs, and I write the first issue, and it doesn't come out until August 2014. For whatever reason, Kindergarten Heroes never comes out, like, ever. The book never sees the light of day. I believe it got sold to Fox, and they were actually in production with an animated feature at one point, and that never came out. And like, I don't know, you know, at this point, technically, I guess Disney owns it, technically, because they bought the Fox, you know, catalog.
Right.
But you know, it was even earmarked to come out as early as we had issue 3 out. And I was talking to Mark, and he was like, hey, look, this could happen. If it does, you know, stake your claim, your book's been out. And I was like, okay. He's like, you know, don't let them push you if this comes out and they're like, hey, you can't have, you know, kindergarten superheroes. Let them know, like, you've actually had this book out for a while, and go. And I'm like, okay, you know, you're absolutely right. Part of the necessity beyond just like getting it out before Mark did was my U Cre-8 Comics line, which I know you want to talk about. I was trying to pitch to schools, and I'm like, hey, I'm a local comic book creator. And the only books that I had were The Trouble with Love, The Samaritan, and another series called Origins Unknown. And Origins Unknown is probably a little bit more teen oriented.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get into elementary schools, and they're like, well, show us some of your work. And I can't show you anything because none of it is kid appropriate. So I was like, oh my God, if I'm going to do this stuff with U Cre-8, I need something kid friendly. And that's why I really buckled down and did the Kindergartens, because I needed something to be able to show schools like, no, I write comics here. You can read them in class. And it's funny how, you know, art inspires art kind of thing, because without the U Cre-8 line, I could have thrown any number of other projects in front of it and not taken the time to do that one. But out of necessity, I had to. So yeah.
You're saying you couldn't sell the Samaritan to elementary school kids?
I think that first issue would have really put some teachers in trouble, principals in trouble. Yeah. Maybe not.
So, I mean, naturally you're a writer, so you can craft beautiful segues, but
well, thank you.
You mentioned U Cre-8.
Yes. So U Cre-8 Comics, the letter U, C-R-E, the number 8 Comics, is an imprint that I started roughly the same time that I did Vantage in-house. And it was a whole product line built and designed to help kids specifically make their own comic characters while still showcasing the educational value of comics. You know, like I said, I didn't like to read as a kid. I use comics as a boost for that. But there's a lot of things that you can learn through comics that really will help make a well-rounded student. And I wanted some materials that would help showcase that, and launched the U Cre-8 line. Our first presentation was in 2011 through Columbus Metropolitan Library's summer reading program. And man, I tell you what, it was part of what saved me when I quit to do comics full-time. Like, I was working for the state of Ohio, which is a cushy job, like, no mistake. And my dad also worked for the state and was like, you know, you can't quit the state and go make comics. Like, what's wrong with you? You got a family. I'll kill you. Like, go to work. And he was so mad, like, because he's worried. He is a parent, and I totally understand it, you know, as a dad myself. And when I got the library gig, everything kind of changed, because he's like, oh, I didn't know you could do, wait, you doing what? Oh, snap. All right, you got this. Go ahead, you know. But it was one of those things where, you know, luckily that came down the pike at a time where I got booked for 21 out of 27 branches, and the pay was fantastic. And he was just kind of like, I'll be quiet now. You know, you've done some things I didn't, you know, and yeah, it really changed everything. And it was an amazing program that actually got me connected with Wizard World initially. I went to a Wizard World Columbus show kind of late, actually, and my lovely lady, Adriana, was talking to, who were we walking with? We were walking with, oh, he's not with the company anymore, so I won't say that. But we were walking with someone, and she started talking about it, asking what kind of programming they have for kids, and they didn't have any. And she's like, well, he does. And they're like, oh, well, let's find out some stuff. And they just hired a new programming manager, and I sent over some samples, and they're like, this is awesome. let's bring you out to like 3 shows next year and you can do it. And it kind of launched from there, where they started taking me on the Wizard World tour because I was providing kid-friendly content, which they didn't really have.
Right.
So it was pretty awesome. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
So you did libraries, you've done have you gotten this program into some schools then too? Like...
Yes. So there's a few Columbus City schools that we've worked with. Let's see. We worked with Stewart Alternative, because last year I did a Kickstarter to basically bring it to 10 schools on the south side of the city. I'm from the south side, and I wanted to do something to kind of impact home, and ran a Kickstarter. It was funded. We got funding to bring it to 3,000 students. So it was like 200 students at 15 schools throughout the south side of the city, and it was fantastic. I've worked with Marburn Academy, which is a school that works with kids that have learning difficulties. I've done a couple of programs with them. I've worked with Our Lady of Perpetual Help, Catholic school in Grove City. I've worked with the Goddard School. Lots of different facilities. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
You've got your kind of your realm of comics that you've created. You've got your production company. You've got this, your Wonder Guardians. You've got your Create.
Right.
I told you guys at the beginning of the interview, hardest work in comics. Like,
gotta live up to it.
So I hesitate to ask, but what else do you have like cooking? Because it seems like you have so much.
I do. So what you have is pretty much a mix of things from what I'm calling phase 1 of Vantage in-house books. They were originally written as separate standalone titles, but somewhere down the line, a through line kind of appeared, and I could see a way to connect all of the stories. So phase 2, which technically Never Too Late is a part of, is that bridge. So I'm trying to show that all of these books are part of a shared universe. In a great sort of lesson learned kind of moment, I actually just had my stuff looked at by a very prominent agent, and while they decided not to represent me right now, one of the things that they were telling me was that they needed to see more world building for some of the different projects, and it was the perfect thing that I needed to hear, but I didn't want to hear. It's one of those like, oh, you're telling me no, but wait, I can learn from this. And it's helping me restructure how I'm going to release phase 2. So really looking at, and this kind of works perfectly, looking at Apex Prime from the Trouble with Love as a launch point. The 2 series that are going to come out will kind of feature him in a way that will expand the world and also introduce other characters and kind of build out from there. We've got a series of books that kind of take place in the past, and then we have some that are a little bit more grounded in what I'm calling the present time, which is actually in between the Trouble with Love and the Kindergartens. So the Kindergartens is actually the future of the Vantage in-house line. So there's little things that we put together that we tease. I'm going to tell you. So in the Kindergartens, there's 2 characters that are actually the sons of the son from the Trouble with Love. So we create a nice fun through line through there, and there's a little Easter egg in it that was funny. Justin put it in there and didn't know that this was the connection. He just thought it was funny to put it in there. So Apex Prime technically makes a cameo in the book, but he didn't know that there was that connection. It was so amazing. When I saw it, I was like, that's funny. And he's like, why? And I tell him, and he's like, are you kidding me right now? And I'm like, no, this is how it works. And so we're creating a larger universe, shared universe that's going to be self-contained. It's how many more series? It's at least 8 more series that we'll be launching that will tell this part of things. We have just inked I say inked like it's written. We will be launching it next week. A distribution platform with Wizard World. So I'm working with them again, and we are using them as a huge distribution platform. I've got a couple other creators that we are working together to do this, and we're going to tap a worldwide audience that can't go to conventions, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to have a lot of fun behind it and lots of great stories. Yeah. And that's going to be ways that we're going to tell the new stories coming out. So yeah, I've got some awesome stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, man, that's neat. I was so funny too, because I was like, you're talking about this connective world, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to see how you connect Trouble with Love or the Samaritan with and you're like,
but I do.
like,
But I have.
challenge
Oh man.
accepted.
Yes. Actually, like if I get into like the ramifications of, I have a buddy, Jeremy, that lives in Utah, and he came to visit last year, and he's been a big, supporter and fan of the work. And I started telling him, and I was like, do you really want to hear this? And he's like, yeah, I really do. And I start running it through like the whole thing of how everything's connected. And he's just like, how do you keep that in your head? And I'm like, it'll be out soon. Like soon I won't even have to keep it in there. It'll be out there, but it's just the way the story kind of told me. And is what it is. So there's things that'll be revealed about Smith from the Samaritan, all kinds of fun stuff.
Which is great, because I know as reading the Samaritan, I was talking with you, I was like, one of the things I was like, I just want more. I want more of this world. And you're like, oh, well, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, far from it. Far from it. When you, it's the greatest compliment that a writer can get is somebody wants more. Right. If you don't want any more of my work, what does that say? Maybe you are satisfied, but then maybe you're not. And that's part of the reason. So, I love that criticism of I want more. I will give you more.
Good. That's what. So, I don't want to keep you too long here,
Sure.
But so if someone is, sees the interview and hasn't kind of jumped into your work yet, where would you recommend them starting?
So ironically, the title that I recommend to people to start with is it seems to be the one that you don't have, which is Origins Unknown. And the reason for that is it's kind of the trade paperback is available at Comic Town. You get kind of like a sampler. They're short stories. It's 6 short stories, each one 8 pages long, and it ends on a cliffhanger where we're introducing a character that is discovering something about themselves. And it kind of gives you a feel for how I write. It'll introduce some characters, nothing that is necessarily set in stone. Only 2 of them, have set follow-ups that are in phase 2. Only 2. There are some other pieces that get, nodded to later, but just 2 of them have like sequels. Only one of those sequels is a direct sequel, like literally picks up where the Origins Unknown story stops. But that's the best place to get started. And then once if you do like that, pick your poison in terms of readership. Right. Kindergartens is all ages. The Trouble with Love is a bit more young adult. And then the Samaritan is a bit more mature. So depending on where you are in your readership, you can go up or you can go down. Okay.
No, that's good. So, you said it's available at Comic Town?
Yep.
You know what? All right. So here's what's going to happen, gang. I'm going to pick up a copy of that book. I'm going to read it. And then all you have to do, leave a comment in this video, and I will send you that copy.
Oh,
there.
That's championship status.
A little, boom, a little incentive. So watch the video, like it, leave a comment, and just say, I want the book or whatever. Nice. Just leave a comment. Nice. And once I finish reading it, I'll give you guys some time to do it. And then I will send out the book. Awesome. So that way we can get you guys into the world.
That's awesome.
Victor.
Dude, thank you.
Anything else that you want to plug, mention before I let you go?
Definitely subscribe to Black, White, and Red All Over at comictown.tv on YouTube. You can also hear me on Hall of Justice podcast. I'm a co-host on there every once in a while. It's usually like maybe twice a month I'm on there. But we've had some crazy guests. Seth Everett is the main host. And we've had everyone from Kevin Smith to Zack Snyder to Kevin Conroy. We had all kinds of people on there. So definitely give us a shout.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much again for taking the time to just talk comics. Because
my pleasure.
It's a blast when you just get to dig into the world of comics and talk about why you love them. Because we all love comics, and that's why we're talking about it. That's why we're reading it, having YouTube channels, talking about comics, because they're great things. And if you're watching this, you love comics. So
100%.
So thank you so much for being on. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview. We got more down the pipeline here. So if you guys like this stuff, make sure you like, subscribe. And as always, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out.